Hello, students. This is a Python exercise that was given to the computing students earlier this week. So, I'm just sharing with you my suggested solutions. Let's take a look, right? So, this is a exercise where we deal with some hens and laying eggs, right? So, we start with some test data. These are the data that we use to test our uh, program to see if it's working fine. So the instructions are such, right? You have been asked to write a program to calculate the average number of eggs laid per week by 4 hens, right? So we start with 4 hens. The hens will lay no more than 1 egg a day. The program should allow you to enter data in the format A, B, C, D, where A, B, C, D are number of eggs laid by each hen for the day. An example is 1, 1, 0, 1. So what this means is that the first hen will lay 1 egg, the second hen will lay 1 egg, the third hen did not lay an egg that day, and the fourth hen will lay 1 egg. So that's how we actually enter the data day by day, right? So only allow data entry of 0 for no eggs or 1 for an egg laid each day. So this statement is there for data validation, right? It tests our ability to actually test to see if the entry that we did contains only 0 and 1s, nothing else, right? So that's what we need to do. Calculate the total number of eggs laid each day. So we need to add up all the number of eggs. Repeat this for a total of 7 days. So we will do it for 1 day and then we repeat it for 7 days. That will give us the data for an entire week. Find the average number of eggs laid by a hen per week, rounded to the nearest whole number. So what we also need is to find out for each of these hen 1, hen 2, hen 3, and hen 4, how many eggs they actually lay in that week, and to find the average number, right? And we also need to calculate the total number of eggs laid for the week. So we got that. So display this on the screen and your output must look like this. So this is how we want it to look like. Okay, as you can see, it will have a day one followed by the eggs and so on. So what we observe from the instruction is this. The running numbers from 1 to 7 is straightforward. We don't have to worry too much about that. But the number of eggs for each day is actually listed in this manner, which means we probably need a list that contains these values, right? So we have um, after entering the list of the number of eggs by each hen, right? We need to actually consolidate them and add them up. So there's actually a sum that's going on, SUM, sum. Let's sum them up. We also want the average number of eggs. So this is the number of eggs per hen, right? And the total number of eggs for the week, which is to add up everything. Okay. So what happened is later on, when we are done with the basic criteria, we can actually get extra credit if you can extend your program to identify each hen that lay less than 4 eggs per week. So there are 4 hens here, which one of them actually laid less than 4 eggs, we will identify them and then we print it out in this manner. So as you can see, in my test data, hen 1 and hen 2 actually laid only 3 eggs that week. So I identify them. So the program should be able to do this, right? So what do I do? Um, Finally, there's a extend your program to work with any number of hens. So we start with 4 and then we test it out. But eventually, we will want to be able to apply this to any number of hens. So that gives us the information that I probably need to actually use the variable number of hens instead of just hard code it as 4, right? So here are my suggested solutions. I'll start by having some user-defined functions. So let's take a look at 3 of them, right? So we are supposed to test whether the inputs are valid, and I'm going to have a user-defined function here to actually test whether it's valid. How do I do it? Okay, the input that I'm going to get, right, is actually the list of eggs. So there's an argument and a parameter that I'm collecting. I use the same name so that it's very clean. We don't have to worry too much. This is not a very advanced program. It's really for beginners, right? So we collect the list of eggs, which is actually the input that we actually key in from the data entry. And what we do is that first of all, we need to test that the number of entries, the number of elements in this list actually matches the number of hens, right? If it doesn't match, then it's an invalid entry, so you return false. Otherwise, okay, what we do is we will return, and what I have here is an OR function. What it does is that I check for every element. I'm going to use X here to represent every element. So the element X, if it's inside this list of 0, 1. So what it means is that I check whether element is it inside this list. That means if it's whether it's 0 or 1, because only 0 and 1 is inside this list for every element in the list that I'm going to pass in. And that's the data that I entered. So if every one of the entries either 0 or 1, I will return a true. Otherwise, it will return a false. So that's what this first user-defined function does for us. Is data validation, right? Input validation. Very clean, right? The next piece of information I will need, right, is actually to get the list of eggs per day, right? I need it per day. Why do I need it? Well, you look at this again, it is because of this. Look at my cursor right here, right? For each day, how many eggs? That's what I want. So having a list of just the sum of the eggs for each day will be great, right? So how do I do that? Well, I'm going to have the data, right? The data will be what I'll key in. Look at the data set. It is actually a whole set of data here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass this thing in, this entire list. It's actually a list of lists, right? As you can see. So I pass it in, just call it data, right? What I do is, okay, I'm going to first declare a list of eggs per day. And then what happened is this is an empty list at the initial part, so it starts from 0. So while the length of the list, right, it starts from 0, is less than the number of days, I'm going to append the sum of the first row, right? So I got data length, this length here, this portion here that I'm highlighting now with my cursor. This is initially 0, so it will be the first row, right? So the length and then data, okay, bracket 0 here, it means it's the first row of my data. I'm going to sum it up. That will give me the total number of eggs for the first day, right? So I'll append it into this list called the list eggs per day. Then after that, what happened? After I append it in, my length of this particular list has increased by 1. So the while loop will continue, right? So now it will be the next row. I will add it in to the list, and then the next row and the next row until I completed all 7 days over here. Okay, so that's what I do. So I need to have a list of all the eggs per day. Now, another piece of information I will need is the number of eggs per hen. This is actually not really for the first part, it's more for the extension, right? So you can see here, down here, I need to actually identify how many eggs each hen lays. So it'd be useful to have a list like that as well. So I also going to have a user-defined functions to do that. So same thing, I get list of eggs per hen. I'm also going to pass in my entire data, which I'm going to collect later, right? So I'm going to pass it in, and I'm also going to have a empty list initially to collect this information. But this time round is a bit tricky, right? Because what happened is this is I'm getting the column, right? Adding up the column instead of adding up the rows. So it's not so easy. I couldn't just use the sum, but there's a way to work around it. So what I do is I start by declaring the day equals to 0. So it's the first day, right? Because we start counting from 0. So starting from the day equals 0. So while the length of the list, okay, which is the list that I'm going to actually fill up, is less than the number of hens, okay, I'm going to have a total 0 because I need to start adding, right? So what happened is while the day is less than number of days, that's fine, right? I append, or rather I add the total by collecting this information. So what happened? Data is the information that I pass it in, right? The data I pass in. Now the day, I'm going to actually run the day. That means the day will start from 0, 1, 2, 3, right? I'm going to collect each day. So the hens will actually stay put. So the length list of eggs per hen, I'm going to hold there. I'm not going to change this for the first pass. And then after that, I add it up to the total. So I got after going through one round here, I will actually have the total number of eggs for the first hen. Then after that, I go back up, okay, and then now I'm going to increase, okay, my length because the length has increased. So now I'll go down again. This time around, I'll be collecting the data for the second hand. Now, take note, one important point is that the day here, I actually need to reset because I'm basically using the day here as an index. But, you know, after I go through one round to collect for the first hand, the value of the day, this variable becomes the total number of days, right? I need to reset it to 0. So at the very end of the loop, I reset it to 0 so that I go in and can go through one more round. So by going through all these rounds, okay, I will actually end up with a list of the eggs per hen, right? So you need to actually, this is a little bit more complicated than the earlier function, but I'm sure if you take your time to run through and see how the data and the information flow, most of you should have no problem understanding this. So that's all my user-defined function. That's all I need. Now to the main program, right? So the main program, I'll start by initialization, right? I'm going to need some information. So I'm going to start by with some variable here. I'll start with data. And this is the data that I'm going to collect for everything, the entire information that I'm going to collect, right? Number of days, I'm just going to declare it as 7 so that in the event I need to extend it further to 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I could actually make adjustments here, although that's not a requirement of the question. The number of hands, this time round, I can actually initially start with 4, and you can declare as 4 as you work your program. Once you know that your program is working fine, I change it to an input prompt so that I can actually change the number of hands because I want to be able to work with any number of hands. That's part of the extension for extra credit, right? So that's all the variable that I need for now. Okay, I'll declare them. And then coming down, I'll start with the input. So let's get the information. Well, the length of the data, remember my data started with an empty list, so it starts from 0, and as I append to this list, it will actually increase, and and the while loop will actually run accordingly. So while this length of the data is less than the number of days because it will run for 7 days, right? I'll print, okay, this one day number. So this one is actually the first day, right? The length plus 1, so that will say day 1, and then after that I will get the input prompt, enter number of eggs laid by each hen. Now what we need to remember is that when we actually collect the information in this way, it is actually a string. So it says here input underscore s. I put an s there so that it reminds me that it is actually a string. Now, after I collect the information, okay, if you remember from the instructions, the numbers are actually separated by commas. So to extract out the numbers itself, I will need to split it. So I'll create a list of eggs. So this will be the list of eggs for that day. And I will, for each of these data inside, I'm going to split it, right? You can see here I split it. And the delimiter inside there is a comma. So I'll split it based on the comma. So after in between each commas, I'll get each of this element. And for each of this element, right, I'm going to cast it as an integer. So what I'll get is that this will be a list of eggs, and inside this will be integers instead of string. So that's how we can do it. Okay. So after I collected the list of eggs, I need to check that this input is actually correct, right? It's actually valid. So I'll check is valid input. This time around, I'll pass in the list of eggs, right? So you can see this will be my user defined function that I'll be using. I pass it in, it will return true or false. So it's a Boolean. So in this case, this is a Boolean. So if it is true, I will append this list of eggs into my data set. Okay, so that is if it's true. If it's false, of course, I don't want to append. I will print out invalid input, try again, and then the while loop actually repeats. Because I did not append, right? This length here, okay, that I just highlighted, this length here doesn't change. So I can keep doing this until I get the correct input. So that's my input. So by doing that, I will my end product will be a data, right? The data set, it will be a list of lists. So it's a list of eggs. And then the rows is actually the number of days. The column is actually the hens, right? Okay, so after this, let's start our processing. So our processing, what are the information I need? I need the list of eggs per day. That will help us, right? I need that information. So I will use my second user-defined function over here to get the list of eggs. I will talk about that. And then I'll also need the list of eggs per hen, right? We also talk about this. We want this piece of information. And if we examine the question, what we need also as well is the average number of eggs. This is per hen. Of course, when we print out, it doesn't require us to put per hen or for each hen, but we understand it, right? So average number of eggs per hen as well as the total number of eggs for the week. So let's see how we get them. Over here under processes. Average eggs per hen, I just collect the list of eggs per hen, right? This is what I've collected. So I'll use that list, and from there, I just need to find the sum, which means I add it all up, right, to get the total number of eggs for each hen, divide by the number of elements inside that, right? So I will actually divide by the length. So this will actually give us the mean or the average, right? The total sum divided by the um, number of eggs, right? Number of hens. So by doing this, after that, I round it off because the question wants us to round it off, so I get my average. So that's fine. Okay, so that's good. Now, the other piece of information I need is the total eggs for the week. I can actually either sum the list of eggs per day or sum the list of eggs per hen. It should give me the same piece of information. So this is fine. So now that I have all the information I need, now for the output. So for the output, right, I will have some index first. The index will be useful, right? So I just use the index number of days. Okay, that means I'll run it 7 times since it's 1 week. Okay, just print out accordingly. Day one, right? I'll tap it so that I get the alignment right. And then the number of eggs. So this will be formatted properly. The number of eggs will be list of eggs per day, because if you look at it, it's day by day I want to list it out. And I'll repeat this for all 7 days to get the whole week. So this is a portion here that will give me this result over here, right? This result over here. Okay. Then after that, I will get the average number of eggs. This time round, I use the slash T so that I get the formatting and the alignment right, and then average number of eggs per hen. And then over here I have the total number of eggs for the week, just accordingly the total. Okay, I have some print here to actually leave a line so that the whole thing look neater as per requirement. So that is how I get my basic requirement. Okay. Finally, there's some extra credit if we actually can identify those hens that lay less than 4 eggs. So this is the extension part. This time around, I use another index. It's called J. While J is less than number of hens, because I need to run through each hen to check how many eggs they actually lay, right? So if, right, the hens, okay, the sum of each hen, how much they lay per week is less than 4, I'll print it accordingly to the format requirement. Otherwise, no action is actually needed. So I just increase my index. And that is my suggested solutions. I hope you have been successful as well. If not, try to understand my solutions and try it out on your own again, right? So digest what I've just mentioned and give you another go. Okay, all the best. Happy Pythoning.